Hi, I'm Metta Spencer, and today we're going to have a very rewarding, for me, very rewarding conversation with a friend of mine, Erika Simpson. Erika is a professor, an associate professor of political science at Western University in London, Ontario. And we've been in touch with each other a long time in the Canadian Pugwash movement. So I think I want to congratulate you first right away, Erika, because I hear you've just been elected to be the president of the Canadian Peace Research Association. Good for you.
Thank you, Metta. I'm
Yeah.
very pleased.
Yeah, you've been the vice president for a while, and now
For
you get
years.
to take on the real load. The
Yeah,
blessings.
we are
And
a large association of right now 46 peace researchers. So
uh-huh.
a collection of mainly professors emeriti, and also lawyers, accountants, people that are interested in peace research. And then, of course, we have graduate students, PhD candidates, master candidates, and we also have teachers. A lot of teachers are very interested in peace and peace education, peace research. And so this year we had
Mostly high school teachers?
yeah, and also elementary school teachers.
Really?
So we had Ann Benton, who is a major figure in Toronto, and also we had Rose Dyson, who
Mhm.
also has a doctorate in educational issues from OISE.
Mhm.
So they presented on media violence.
Oh,
And
that's always the topic that is
yeah,
of most concern to. Rose just did a book review for us about um, Dave Grossman's book, which of course
you
has to
mentioned
do
that.
with
Yeah, we
media
distributed the
violence.
Peace magazine, and so she gave a talk, and she also pointed to that book review, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, but I'm looking forward to reading it. Rose was there, and we also have last year we had some very interesting Indigenous teachers. Blair Stonechild from the University of Regina. So
Mhm.
I'm hoping that next year the Congress we meet under the auspices of the Congress of Humanities and Social Sciences, which is a huge organization of many scholarly.
What used to be called the Learneds.
That's
In my
right.
day,
Yeah, I remember. I
we
remember the
called ourselves the Learneds as if
yeah,
we really had something special going for us. But
yeah.
now it's a more
I've been attending the Learned since the 80s, and it's getting bigger and better every year. So
really.
here it was at UBC at the University of British Columbia,
Uh-huh.
and the campus is really, they're doing a lot of construction there and a lot of new buildings. So there was a chance to meet a lot of different people, including um, people, they had a lot of Indigenous representatives who spoke in terms of First Nations truth and reconciliation. So I was really pleased. And I hope next year at Western, because it's going to be at my university,
Mm-hmm.
which is the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, which is about an hour and 15 minutes drive from the Toronto airport. And there's also trains and buses, the Greyhound buses, and there's a shuttle bus. So we're hoping that we attract at least 20,000 people. They attracted about 15,000 to UBC. And when you join the Canadian Peace Research Association, which is only $60 for the whole year, you can pay when you come. You get a lot of value for your money. So in addition to the network, you get to post your articles on our website and our Facebook page. So that helps to increase. Some people don't want to buy their own website, and so what we do is we post people's publications. And I
Mm-hmm.
have students that work for me at Western who obviously help me to do that, make it look pretty and so on. They love working on Facebook and websites.
You're such a great teacher. I don't know anybody else who organizes her students and carries them around to meetings, and
Well, thank you.
wonderful. That I wish you would have been my teacher.
Oh, well, you were my teacher. I don't know if you recall, but you were one of the first people I ever interviewed when I was working on at the UBC newspaper at UBC.
No, I
I
don't
was
remember
so
that.
afraid. I phoned you long distance, and I put you in an article, and I was so honored that you granted me an interview. It was then on submarines. And the daycare, it's better to pay for daycare than submarines was the quote that I got.
Oh,
Still remember, I mean, that's 30 years ago.
that was in the days when, I guess it still happens, so the U.S. submarines go up the
That's right.
strait of whatever it's called.
Strait of Juan de Fuca.
Uh-huh.
And,
Uh-huh.
yeah, and they go
And
to
that still
Nauru.
happens, right?
Yes, it does. I was driving by there the other day. There was a lone protester. He protests every Sunday. Give him a lot of credit. Stands there outside of Nanu's Bay with a big, huge sign protesting the fact that nuclear-armed submarines are traveling so close to Vancouver, which is nuclear weapon free, but the land is nuclear weapon free, but the Strait of Juan de Fuca is one of the, well, it is the only shallow testing range on the Pacific coast for the United States. So they have leased it from the federal government for 30 years, more than 30 years. And that's where they do their testing of the shell of their torpedoes, their nuclear
Really?
torpedoes, because it's very shallow. I've seen it myself. And actually, my brother was telling me, he's a very good kayaker, that once a submarine rose up beside him while he was kayaking in the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Can you imagine?
One submarine could be the end of the world. They've got
exactly. Exactly. They sleep right beside the submarines, or besides the nuclear weapons. You know, the wall. I was hearing an officer telling me that they're actually sleeping right next to the nuclear weapons.
Who sleeps
you know, the people who are working on the submarines, they're working in difficult conditions too, because they're exposed to all sorts of toxic air compounds that are in the air and mold. So the Department of National Defense needs to figure out how to improve the air quality, not just of our boats and frigates in our Navy, but the Americans have that issue as well. Anyway, I don't know what they do with the waste, but I mean, talking about the submarine issue, I'd love to talk to you more about BC, but we have so much to cover regarding the
Well, tell me, let's go back to
underground nuclear
talking.
waste site.
I want to talk about the CPRA meetings, because
right.
we finished this and there were people giving papers, and I haven't been to one in 2 or 3 years. So bring me up to date on what I'd kind of like to know what the topic of most interest is when people, besides the papers they give, when people get together, what is the issue that you're mostly talking about these days?
We talk about so many things, and I was thinking there's so many themes, not just truth and reconciliation and peacemaking techniques, but we talked a great deal about peacemaking in Africa. For example, there was a PhD doctor who's working on Nigeria. His case study was on new ways of peacemaking in Nigeria amongst the tribes there. He himself was from that area. So it's fascinating. I really thought that was very interesting. I hope he comes back next year. We also had a lot of talks. I don't know if you know Tamara Lawrence.
Yes.
Do you know her? Voice of Women?
Yes, I her work on the relationship between the military and climate change is, I think she's really
did a fantastic talk on military bases and how they need to be decontaminated. She had so many facts and figures, and it was so well done. I was fascinated because she knows so much about high-level hazardous waste that's not being cleaned up close to the military bases in Canada, and they're just beginning this billion and billion dollar process.
Now, wait a minute. Where would we be getting toxic waste on military bases in Canada? Because we don't have nuclear weapons here.
So, well, she was speaking more about the old dew line, the McGill fence, the North Warning System in the Arctic. I guess there's just a lot of toxic waste, high level and low level.
Radioactive waste, or just
not? And I imagine that they're keeping close tabs on the rods, the high level and the low level and intermediate level waste coming from the nuclear power reactors in Ontario. So Darlington, Pickering, and the Bruce, the largest operating nuclear site in the world. That nuclear waste something will have to be done with it as they are refurbished, Pickering and Darlington, and Bruce is also being refurbished right now, actually by SNC-Lavalin, but we can talk about that later. SNC-Lavalin, so, which is in the news. So getting back to the presentations, there were so many excellent presentations, not just Tamara, but larger thinking people who are thinking about capitalism. Peter Venton comes to mind, who's on the Canadian Pugwash Board. We also had a professor emeritus who, Dan Shrubstick, talked about capitalism. So there's larger philosophical ideas about what are the problems, the root problems underlying peace and also conflict. And then I myself gave a presentation on NATO and the NPT and the prepcom. And that, of course, other people are interested in NATO as well. So it's always a debate about NATO and it's our burden sharing and contribution. Should we stay in NATO and so on? That is, par for course. And then, we had a huge program I put together. It's 24 pages long, so it's hard for me.
Really? I would like to get back to your topic about NATO if we have time.
Sure.
But before we do that, maybe we can talk about what your adventures in the Big Apple. I know that you go down there every year, many times probably, but in this case, the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference preparatory committee meeting took place because next year is the big one. They do it every 5 years, and next year will be the big one, and a very scary one from my point of view. It sounds.
I think so too. Yeah, we're all worried.
You are about the third person I've talked to, or fourth, about what went on there, and I haven't heard an optimistic word yet.
No, I think anyone you speak to, even among the nuclear weapon states, I was at NATO headquarters in October, and the director of the Weapons of Mass Destruction Center told me that he was very fearful that in 2020, the NPT will actually collapse, and that will lead to the end of our safeguard system. So he agreed with Doug Roche, who we all know, former senator, former member of parliament, that we're entering a nuclear jungle. So he agreed with that. And I also interviewed Guy Roberts, who's the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Weapons. So I interviewed him in October at NATO headquarters. And only for half an hour. He's very busy, has 6 bodyguards. He's super busy, but he also agreed that it is a very dangerous situation. So everybody, even those who are in favor of deterrence, strongly in favor of nuclear modernization, are very concerned about the NPT and also the impact of the treaty on the proliferation of, let me give it to me again, on the ban treaty, the prohibition treaty, the TPNW. So
you're worried about that?
They're worried about its impact because most of them that are at NATO tend to be very critical of it. They want to with the NPT.
Yeah.
They want to have the ban treaty. They see it as misinformed and not as a repetitive. They want to stay with Article 6 of the NPT and Article 4, and they don't want to deal with the implications of the ban treaty. Because remember, it's being ratified. I don't recall how many countries have ratified it, but do you recall it was 122 countries voted?
122, but I don't know how many in the order of 50 by now have ratified it, but it's going through pretty quick. They are ratifying it in pretty short order. Yeah, it's of course, it's to me not at all surprising that the nuclear weapons states don't like it. I mean, so what else is new? I mean, what did you expect, frankly? But you sound as if maybe, am I reading you right, that you think they have a point? That you think it actually does jeopardize the NPT?
No, I'm just saying what they say in the interviews. When I interview them, I'm very objective. I mean, I see both sides of the issue because on the one hand, they're arguing that because the nuclear weapon states were never there from the beginning and they weren't part of the negotiations, it's unfair to them. But on the other hand,
they could have been there all along.
To come, they could have gone to the UN.
Of course.
They could have. Canada didn't even send observers we didn't even send observers. So,
That's absurd. That's an argument that is laughable.
I hear the same. I mean, I also interviewed Canada's ambassador to NATO, and she's actually retired now. But anyway, this is Mike Pearson's wife. Anyway, so Carrie said to me, and I got to recall it because it was off record interview, what I can say, but basically she was pro-deterrence. So if you're in favor of deterrence and you're in favor of nestling under the nuclear umbrella provided by the United States, then you cannot support the TPNW because it calls for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, nuclear testing, making nuclear weapon-free zones, and so on. So long as we support the US, as you know, Metta, with nuclear deterrence, then we can't, and I've heard from Angela Kane, the High Commissioner of Disarmament, former High Commissioner, once she was retired, when I was in Astana in Kazakhstan at a conference on nuclear dangers. She sat beside me and she said, you know, Erika, it's a cartel. It's the P5. They want to keep their nuclear weapons. It's not just the US. It's the Chinese, the British, the French. They want, and obviously India and Pakistan, they want to keep their arsenal.
Of course.
And while they're pointing their fingers at North Korea and Iran and saying you can't have your own nuclear weapons, look at the 15,650 nuclear weapons that they have. That they're, I mean, they can blow up the world thousands of times over. Mm-hmm. So not India and Pakistan, but just the great powers. So no, I'm not. I'm a strong supporter of the Prohibition Treaty, and that's why I've been interviewing these people to find out what they think as we move very rapidly toward 2020, which will be next April, May for 1 month in New York City. And the prepcoms, the 3 preceding prepcoms, were 2 weeks long.
Well, let's back up because, you know, this morning I saw a video of Vladimir Putin in a meeting. And he really, actually, it was Earl Turcotte who sent it to me. He sent it to a lot of people. You probably got it. But he was speaking to maybe 30 people who were seriously listening to him. And he was going on and on about how don't you people realize what a terrible risk we're in? Don't you have any idea how threatening and dangerous this thing is? And the things and our arms control agreements are just going, and we'll have nothing. And he goes as if he himself is in a state of high anxiety, which he damn well should be. But then the corollary is not, well, let's therefore talk about disarmament. The corollary is, let's go back to the negotiating table and have some more. He doesn't even say what he wants, but I know from talking to other Russians that the things they really look forward to would be a resumption of arms control talks, which have just pretty much been ended. And it looks as if the New START treaty will maybe die too.
Well, you know, if you
listen to his tone of voice, he sounds realistic. If you listen to the implications of what he's recommending, it's like more of the same. Let's just keep on with our nuclear deterrence, and maybe someday we might reduce them a little bit. I mean, sorry, but I'm not very rational on this subject. I get pretty upset.
You're rational. You're an expert on Russia, and you've spoken to many more Russians for certain than I ever have. But like you, I think the Russians are very concerned, and they are now over at NATO headquarters. They have offices across the road in the old NATO headquarters. So they walk over to the, I went to a reception, and that's where the Ukrainians and the Kazakhs and Kazakhstan and all the people from the foreign that are on the old Warsaw Pact side, they come over and try to hobnob with the NATO allies, 29 of them. So
tell me about that. That sounds interesting. Who does what?
Well, they come over, they cross the road. You see, I've been to NATO headquarters, I think 7 times, and it used to be in an old high school. It's quite a large high school. And then they just built a huge new headquarters. It's like an air hangar building. It's enormous. The ceilings, actually, Guy Roberts told me he really doesn't like it. He said it takes so long. Actually, other diplomats told me too. I interviewed Jamie Shea, who's the longest serving diplomat at NATO, private secretary of the Secretary General, and on and on. I interviewed him in his last hour before he retired. And I'd interviewed him before, and he said to me, Erika, I really don't like this new building because we used to just zip up and down the staircases at the back and go visit each other and get things done. He said, now I've got to walk for like, it seems like miles to go down to see the American embassy and go way over there and see the Canadian.
I can't visualize it. I was at the old one many years ago. I think Ambassador Taylor, was that his name? The Canadian ambassador then, maybe 30 years ago. And I did interview him there, but I can't visualize. I remember going in the place, but I don't remember the outfit.
Well, now you should see the new place. I mean, it's very impressive. The UN is also very impressive, but NATO has put, these Grecian sculptures, and they have all the flags out at the front and a sculpture or a piece of the Berlin Wall at the door. It's very impressive, and the security is extremely high. The most security that I've ever gone through, apart from when I visited the Bruce nuclear power plant. And that had the most security. They had more guards. They finger swabbed you. That you went through doors, and they checked your Geiger radiation and so on. That's up at north of Goderich.
What do they think? You're going to smuggle in a dirty bomb or something?
Smuggle out. You're going to smuggle out material, and so they're checking you. It's checked by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Really? Huh.
So I was fascinated and it's also surrounded by barbed wire and the fences and security cameras, and it's super secure because that's where
go over there very often, don't you? That seems to be your main beat. NATO, covering NATO. And
also I'm really working now on the DGR, the Deep Geological Repository. And I don't know, I got too many projects going.
Where's that?
That's going to be the proposal is to build a nuclear hazardous waste disposal site that would be basically underneath the Bruce nuclear power plant. So it would be human constructed in limestone, which is water permeable. It would be approximately 1.2 kilometers away from the shores of Lake Huron. So people in Michigan, the senators and fishermen and fisher people, I should say, and all sorts of associations in Michigan are very concerned about the threat to the Great Lakes. Because remember, 40 million people over the next 100,000 years are going to be shipped. Right now we have 40 million people, but that waste will have to be somehow protected for the next 100,000 years. So they don't have the kinds of they don't have tanks and things yet that could last more than 500 years. So I got to look at the holding tanks, and
really,
they're very large, they're huge, and those will have to be buried along with all the low-level and mid-level waste that will be transported up from Pickering in Toronto and Darlington in Toronto, and also they'll take all the Bruce nuclear waste.
So wait a minute, they take all this juice and they put it into one big tank? How big?
No, many tanks. There's,
right.
I would estimate.
Okay, because it would.
It's tons of it.
Yeah, you couldn't.
It's huge. It's going to be about 7 kilometers long. Underneath the ground. That's what they're estimating. It might, and I think it has to. I just don't quote me on this, but I think it's around 200,000 square feet of nuclear waste that will be.
How much have they agreed to this? Because I remember a couple of years ago, Brene Lloyd, who's up in North Bay or someplace, and who follows these.
Brennan Lloyd.
Brene, yeah.
Yeah, Brene, she knows a lot.
She gave a talk about it. But at that point, they were still searching for a place. And now you're saying that they have really decided, and this is a firm plan? Because
it's not been approved by the federal government, by Kathy McKenna, and it won't be approved until after the next federal election. So also, and this is the interesting part, is there are a number of First Nations around there, and the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation is going to, the federal government says, have a veto on whether the plan goes ahead or not. There will be some construction jobs, but that will go to professionals. And so there's not going to be, the estimates are very vague. How many jobs would there be for the SON Nation? I suspect that they're going to be disappointed. So it is not a firmly agreed to plan, which is why I think I've written 6 or 7 op-eds for Post Media for the Ontario, which are often in Owen Sound up there. That's where that's the newspaper, the Sun Times. So yeah, I'm working quite a lot on that and on NATO and on the strategic concept and deterrence. I forgot to tell you, Meta, about the panels that we had at the UN. Can I tell you?
Well, yeah, let's talk about that next.
We had 4 panels.
Mm-hmm.
It was on strategies for advancing to
At the NPT Review Conference, as part of the consultations, and then you organized it for Pugwash, or?
Well, no, Adele Buckley helped me as always. She's
Who?
my partner, Dr. Adele Buckley,
Yes.
former chair of Pugwash, and she helped me with my students. And you know, we had the Pugwash Thinkers Lodge, and we had Pugwash sponsorship, and then we had the chair of Pugwash, Paul Meyer, and Jennifer Simons, who you know from
Mm-hmm.
Simons. She's the president and founder of the Simons Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So that was well received. That's when Doug Roche told me that people started to get a little down, because that was on May the 1st. That was when they're starting to realize we weren't going to get anywhere. Then I brought in Guy Roberts, who's the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, the day before, he had an accident and he was unable to be Skyped in. I was going to Skype him in. By the way, Matt, I forgot to say that we Skyped in a guy from New Zealand at the CPRA. So let's say you couldn't come to the CPRA, I would Skype you in, and you could do your presentation. And then
was this like a panel where they all had a discussion, or were they giving separate papers?
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, it was great.
Because I mean, some of these guys are not going to get along. I can imagine.
Oh, it was fantastic. You know, that's why I was so proud, Meta, because I've always wanted to bring in the NATO diplomats and the U.S. high-level diplomats and go to the UN and talk to like Tariq Rauf and engage. It was so fantastic. I was really pleased to go. Yeah, so I'm still working on peacekeeping. I just did an article in Policy Options on the new future for peacekeeping. What could peacekeeping do? So that was, anyway, I don't want to extol my articles, but, and then here we have, which is Adele Buckley really has spearheaded, as you know, for so many years, the Arctic nuclear weapon-free zone idea. So Adele came down. It was so great. There she is. And then this guy, I can't pronounce his name, Dr. Jarkel Sakan Enkasakan. Anyway, he could not come from Mongolia. He became ill. And so he is the chairman of Blue Banner, which is an organization that's trying to make Mongolia a nuclear weapon-free zone, like Kazakhstan. And then Alan Ware, who some of you will know as the global director of Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation Disarmament.
Right.
So it was great. We all had many panel discussions, and I thought it was just super helpful for engaging not just with NGO representatives, but with diplomats. I know there were 3 Russian diplomats that came and never said a word. They just sat there the whole time, didn't ask questions. I was just looking like them, like wondering what they were going to report back. And then there was people from right-wing American think tanks, a guy from the Hudson Institute. They're coming in from Washington. And so they came and they told me they thought it was extremely interesting. And a guy from US Spacecom, who, you know, just all sorts of people.
As you said that by a certain date, by the Wednesday or whatever it was, that people were already aware that it was going to be a flop, that you were not going to come up with anything. What were the signs of this, and what was the expectation? What was the aspiration? What did people hope to achieve there that would have made the difference, and why didn't it work?
Well, those are a lot of challenging questions, Meta. Thank you. And I don't have the answers to it because I was not in the direct negotiations. I was at the NPT in 2010, and that's when they agreed on a huge set of a huge set of steps, 64 steps. And everyone was in jubilation because there was consensus that we'd move toward all these steps, including the FMCT, the CTBT, and all sorts of arms control steps. But that seems to have gone by the wayside because in 2015, they could not agree on a consensus document. So then now, in 2019, there was no consensus by the chair. He couldn't obtain a consensus, although you could argue there was a consensus among the non-aligned movement that something has to be done. And so they were angry. And if you read the reports by Reaching Critical Will, it's a very good analysis. It's a newsletter. It gives you a day-by-day analysis of what each country said with connections to those speeches. So you can read over the 2 weeks the mounting frustration as they realize that they're not going to see there's not going to be any budging, no movement by the nuclear weapon states, and that's what's so disappointing. They don't want.
You know what would have had to happen? What exactly would have been required to come up with anything like a consensus document at the end?
I think they would have had to return to 2010, and they would have had to look at some of those planks that Tariq Rauf himself put forward, along with Randy Riddell, who's retired now. Those were the diplomats that worked for the UN, and Angela Kane. There's a whole set of recommendations there.
And those have been abrogated or forgotten about.
The ones that have abrogated, well, yeah, North Korea has withdrawn from the NPT, but it's still a strong treaty. We have to recognize it's still the most successful arms control treaty in history. And so
it's got going for us.
It's getting to be that point, right? So there's a lot of holes in it, especially in Article 4 regarding sharing of nuclear energy and nuclear reactors.
Exactly.
So, and there's problems too with Article 6, which says they'll move in good faith toward general and complete disarmament, but there's no timelines. So they can say, well, we're moving. That's what the Americans will say is, well, look, we've disarmed so much since the end of the Cold War, which is true.
Oh, yeah. Now, did anybody speculate about what might happen if we got a Democratic president of the U.S. next? But that's not going to happen soon enough because the real review conference is next year, and that's before there will be a new president. But, there are some very nice sounding Democratic candidates who might move things a little bit if they got elected. But
we thought that under Obama, and we had more hope with President Obama.
And what I thought too, but
he got the Nobel Prize. But,
Joe Cirincione was in Ottawa last fall, and he swears that Obama really meant it, that he really wanted disarmament. I don't know about abolition, but a lot of movement, and just couldn't do it.
I think so. When you read the comments that he made at the Prague summit, I think he truly was motivated, and then he was just stymied by the bureaucrats and the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, the NATO policymakers. They always have strong arguments for the status quo, and which is kind of why I hold an element of hope for Trump, because he has met with Kim Jong-un twice and tried to negotiate disarmament. So he walked away, and he needed to walk away because Kim Jong-un was not going to make any real substantive changes. So he walked away. I'm not advocating that as a peacemaking approach. But
I know what you mean, but Cirincione at the time was also saying, well, that was after the first meeting, and he was a bit optimistic that maybe Trump could do something, that he was trying. I don't know. I mean, give the guy as many benefits of a doubt as you can, but
well, he might, as he moves toward, perhaps if he's reelected and he moves to the kind of final 2 years of being in power, you'll be very old then. He may think to himself after some briefings about the horrors of nuclear war that he might change his mind. But right now he thinks, and I've read his comments before the election and his interviews, and I did a good analysis. I went through everything he was saying. And he truly thinks that nuclear weapons are usable. He thinks it could be usable. Why did we spend so much money on weapons that are not usable? So when a person thinks that nuclear weapons are usable, then that's moving beyond. That's moving into preemptive war strategy.
That's a whole other thing. I mean, as I understand it, within even NATO, there are initiatives to think of maybe small nuclear bombs, maybe tactical, maybe battlefield. Maybe we could do something that would make something useful. I mean, I'm making this up, but
no, you're not. I mean, that's true, because they're modernizing the B-61 bombs, which are in 5 non-nuclear weapon states. So they're deployed by the Americans, and they would be used by Americans. The US president only has authority to use NATO's tactical nuclear weapons. So those weapons are being modernized, which is why Putin is saying he will deploy nuclear weapons to Kaliningrad, the Russian enclave on the Baltic Sea. So he's already put the missiles there, and he's saying, I'm going to put the nuclear weapons there because you're putting nuclear weapons in Germany and you're putting them in Turkey. That's very vulnerable because of the military government and ISIS and ISIL and the risk of a takeover. But I'm sure the CIA has figured something out regarding Turkey. But that said, those 5 nuclear states have tactical nuclear weapons. And then we have to think about the French, who have 300 nuclear weapons of their own, which is they have under their force de frappe, an independent striking force. So they have that. And then if I can just keep going for one more country, Scotland is going to be nuclear free if they have a referendum. They want to stay with the EU. And do you know where the British Tridents are?
Yeah, I know that. Now there's a long way to go before that happens, though, right? That means they would leave Britain, and stay in the EU, and then what would the Brits do with the nuclear subs?
The Scottish National Party, which is the party that wants to have a referendum and also leave, is firmly anti-nuclear. So they're saying that they would not even lease the river and the docking site to
then England or Britain, whatever's left of UK,
and Wales,
move their submarines someplace. Where would they put them? I mean, they're really not going. They're committed to keeping them, aren't they? There's nobody. I mean, Corbyn, of course, said he would.
No movement there, except for Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn was in PNND. He was in Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. So, but will he be elected? We don't know. Boris Johnson, we don't know. I mean, it's just.
I don't even know whether I want him to be for other reasons, because of Brexit.
I mean, they could always negotiate with Canada and put them on the Atlantic somewhere, or even on the Pacific. It's not, we put them in the Nile.
Canada wouldn't let them.
Other country. No, we don't have nuclear armed subs, nor do we have nuclear powered subs. We have the British upholders.
If they tried that, that would really give us a good thing to go to battle on. You and I would be out in the streets.
Well, I did write an article. I actually wrote 2 op-eds with the head of the Scottish National Party, their defense critic, and my article just went through Ontario. I wasn't too concerned, but he put the article that we wrote in their parliamentary stuff, and then he distributed it and on and on. It was obviously on how Scotland should be nuclear weapon free. And so he really used that article very well. I was pleased. And I think as we move toward the end of this Brexit issue in October, we're going to have to pin down the Scots on this and say, hey, what do you think about nuclear weapons? But, everything is in turmoil.
Okay, great. Now, you have written several articles for Peace Magazine over the years. Oh, yeah. And I think I would love to have you tell us all about the one about the SNC Lavalin, because I'd always known a little bit about the stories that you gave us, the articles you gave us, but this one
that was
really shocked me. It was like a scoop. I didn't know anything about it, and so far as I know, the rest of the press has not mentioned it much.
No, I did write another shorter article for the Hill Times on SNC Lavalin, and they put it on page 3. And so it was in the Hill Times. So it ran after I wrote the article for you in, I think it was April. But when I wrote the article for you, that was in January, February, and I did not know that SNC Lavalin is so focused on nuclear construction and on refurbishment of the Pickering, Darlington, and the Bruce Power plants.
See, what I didn't even know they had anything to do with that.
Oh, hundreds of millions.
The connection between that company and the Atomic Power of Canada.
Yeah, ACL.
It's absolutely news to me, and I don't think many other people know about it either. How come that isn't part of the story that we hear about all of the shenanigans and crooked things going on that, in government and so on?
I think the media's focused so much on Jody and on Trudeau and on Gerald Butts, the human beings, and if it bleeds, it leads. They're having a conflict and so on. But the real structural problem for Canada, as SNC-Lavalin's own CEO said, he was quoted in the Globe and Mail, and then I quoted him as well, is if you don't keep us, then who's going to do Bruce? Who's going to do Darlington? Who's going to do Pickering, the refurbishment? It will be the Americans. And he said the American engineers are going to have to come up and do it for us. So he was being a bit nationalist by saying, you've got to protect our company. So forget about the corruption charges. What they're saying is that they are the experts in nuclear construction. So they've absorbed over the years other nuclear construction companies that were based in Toronto. So they're based not just in Montreal, but they're also based in Mississauga. So I found out all of this, Metta. I got more and more involved in it. And then I wrote the article for you, then I wrote another article. What did I write? I can't even recall. But anyway, I just kept writing articles and footnoting it and so on and so on. But I have to publish a longer article on that soon, before this story, before the federal election is over. So anyways, quite shocked that, and I kind of wonder if that's why Gerald Butts protected SNC-Lavalin, because recall that Gerald Butts was the advisor to Dalton McGuinty, his chief principal advisor, when Ontario, under McGuinty, decided to move from coal-powered plants to nuclear power plants. And he was the one who, because of climate change, advocated that. So I don't know if you recall, but his resignation letter, remember when he resigned? There was
but I don't remember the
there was a funny sense where he said our future generations and our children will remember what we did about climate change. And I thought, well, what does climate change have to do with SNC-Lavalin? But now that I know more about his strong advocacy of nuclear power plants for Ontario, then I understand that he needs to keep them going. And so that's why he needed to support SNC-Lavalin and make sure that they don't go under, and make sure that they're not barred from bidding on Canadian government contracts and provincial.
Well, I think it would be lovely to see somebody take him on there, because in fact, that really needs to be, that is the underlying argument. Would even just Ontario, would Ontario need nuclear power when we could in fact get it from Quebec?
Yeah, that's the argument made by Angela Bischoff,
right.
Very well at Clean Energy.
So I think that the case that, we are saving the world from global warming by using nuclear power, somebody else could maybe make that argument more convincingly, and I'm not sure I'd always be convinced anyway. But in the
problem is the waste. And Gordon Edwards, Dr. Gordon Edwards, who's the president of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, he's also a very good expert on the problems with nuclear waste, Chalk River, and also the problems that we're going to have in the long-term future. Because
the waste is already here. We can't undo that, but we can stop. We can stop making more and more of it.
Well, it's like building a house without a toilet, for God's sake, Metta. I mean, what were they thinking about? They built the whole thing, and then they suddenly go, well, where are we going to put the toilet? In fact, I don't know. So, they might be experts, but you and I that deal with diapers and poop and things like that, we were, the first thing we're going to think about is, what do we do with the waste?
With the waste, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, yeah, so I wrote that article, and then maybe we should talk briefly, because I am from London. We should talk about the light armored vehicles controversy.
Yeah. See, this is just so obvious that when people talk in hypothetical terms about the military-industrial complex, it all sounds very abstract. But when it comes down to, do we sign this contract, and do we fulfill our commitments under that contract, or do we have any concern about human rights, then what really comes out as the underlying thing as well, we've got jobs to think of, or we have investment money that we don't want to lose, or we can't lose a corporation like SNC-Lavalin. We can't afford to not have them as Canadian, or all of these
General Dynamics.
Whatever, the retention of money as the justification for God knows what, almost anything, is acceptable if there's money involved. and we have to defend jobs. Okay, so let's talk about those.
Well, when the
Saudi
conservative government
contract.
negotiated the deal, they said it was going to bring in $13 billion from the Saudi kingdom, and that General Dynamics figures, which are a little bit hard to pin down, are that it would create 3,000 jobs. But now it seems like it would sustain 3,000 jobs, and it's not so much creating new jobs. So it's 3,000 jobs in London, which I live there, has a population of around, during the winters when the students are there, around 370,000. And so London's becoming a bit of a defense hub with Waterloo because of the drones that are being built in Waterloo as well.
I didn't know that. Who's building drones for what purpose?
Aeryon, Aeryon Scout is building them in Waterloo.
For what kinds of, what are they going to use them for?
Oh, well, that's a good question, because one of their drones was used by Libyan rebels to hover over Colonel Gaddafi's camps in order to try to threaten and see what he was doing. So they bought a $100,000 drone and they ran it over Gaddafi's tent camp there. You can do anything with a drone now. You can take photographs of people in their swimming pools, you know, without them knowing. You can use drones to obviously kill Pakistani militants, but you're also killing civilians. That's where most of the drone deaths have occurred, for civilians, and you can kill a high-ranking ISIS people, but they can also be used to carry in the future anthrax across borders. And NATO's researching drones the size of hummingbirds, little ones. I think Iran has built the Merchant of Death drone. Oh, drones. I've written a lot on drones, but I want to just return to labs because drones are a big issue. I don't mind returning to them. But labs, the light armored vehicle issue in London, Ontario resonates because the riding is London Fanshawe. And that riding has been traditional in NDP riding with Irene Madison, who's a member of Parliament for many, many years, but she's retired. And the person who's running will be a young woman, her daughter, in her early 30s for the NDP. And I believe they still do not have a Liberal candidate running. So it's always a battle between the Liberals and the Conservatives, but I think everybody's afraid to take on that riding. It's a battleground.
So what do the NDP say about the LAVs?
The NDP Madison wants to ensure employment for the General Dynamics employees. And then at the same time, I'm not sure what the NDP platform is right now, because they'd have to try to ensure employment for the employees at the same time as they would, I don't know whether they, certainly I've been condemnatory of the arms trade treaty. So the Liberals have signed the large international arms trade treaty. But when I testified, they asked me to testify in the Senate. So I went up there on November 22nd. You can see my testimony, it's televised.
I'm sorry. You condemned the ATT?
No, what I did is, see, the problem is we signed the ATT, but they're saying the General Dynamics deal was already signed and approved by the Department of Global Affairs. So we're going to ignore that one. It's going to go into the future for 15 years. We're not going to abide by the ATT. We're going to abide from now on. So then I keep hammering at them, but you know, we're going to sign and abide by it strictly, not in general terms, but we also need to think about the LAV deal. That's why they wanted me up there. So Pratt and Whitney was there because they make engines. And so it was a debate among the senators about how closely we need to abide in the future by the ATT, and also how much we have to change our past contracts. So the British, for example, have all the departments in Britain now have a look at these sort of arms trade deals, and they examine them and see if they abide by the ATT. Whereas in Canada, the only department that's going to be looking at this, and the only person, is the Department of Global Affairs, the Minister of Global Affairs. So that means then that only one person gets to say yes, and that decision goes into the future. That's not enough. So what we're saying is, if we're going to abide by the ATT, and Canada's always abided by the NPT, we've abided by the Landmines Treaty, we've abided by a host of treaties. So if we're going to abide by it, then let's abide by the letter and not sneak around. So the senators liked it when I said, well, let's not sneak around, because that's what it is, it's sneaking around. They laugh.
So tell me what the people around London feel. What's public opinion on this issue, given that that's where the jobs are?
And the feedback I get is usually nothing. Nobody writes to me. I never hear anything. I mean, it's huge articles. Once I heard from a General Dynamics contractor who said he was dismayed. But
Dismayed by your
well, he was dismayed by working on the labs. He didn't feel it was morally right. So he
really okay.
But I never hear anything. I think most people are looking at their Apple phones and reading stuff, but they're pretty apathetic.
But if it's their jobs, you'd think they'd have an opinion. And somebody must have done polls or something to find out what general impressions people have. In fact, the political parties must have some sense of it, because they're going to have to take
The London Free Press, one of their reporters called me the other day, but right now it's not a story because it was a story when Khashoggi was killed. But right now, maybe I'll write another article on it because... But
the whole policy is still in place, right? It's like nothing has changed. And there's been a lot of noise, not
a lot of noise. Well, look, I mean, Stéphane Dion, the Minister of Global Affairs, resigned. We've had a huge controversy, front page of the Globe and Mail and so on for months about this. And then the public's attention went elsewhere. So it's like the CNN effect, we focus on it for a few days.
Well, the only polls that I remember seeing at the time, when it was really a heated debate, was for the whole Canadian population. It wasn't local. And that was that the majority of people thought that it was not something that Canada should do. And I quite agree. It's not.
Well, remember, Yemen is the hugest humanitarian crisis in right now this year. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has announced that it's past Syria. So Syria had 12 million refugees, and he's now saying that Yemen, 22 million people are threatened, like their lives. So this is the biggest humanitarian crisis in history, and the Saudis are involved. We don't know if they're using the labs in Yemen. There was footage that was supposedly the Canadian labs, but it wasn't proven. So the Department of Global Affairs is saying that the labs are not being used. But I would argue the labs could be used against civilians in Saudi Arabia. It's a military dictatorship. And they could be used to repress citizens. And I'm not advocating revolution in Saudi Arabia, not at all, but I'm saying that they are part of the military-industrial complex that you mentioned at the beginning. And we are profiting from the Saudis' oil-rich titans who want to buy whatever they can buy. I mean, if people argue, well, if they don't buy it from London, they'll buy it from elsewhere, and that's true. But the Germans have said no, and other countries are saying no. So if other countries are abiding by the ATT...
Well, even in the U.S., the U.S. Navy was apparently helping the Saudis. I don't remember what they were helping them do, but have given them material aid. But then I think Congress tried to say that they wouldn't allow any more support for the Saudis against Yemen. And last I heard, Trump was not going to obey the orders that
well, he's all over the place. I mean, he's saying he's going to withdraw from Syria and Afghanistan. Then he says he's going to stay and send more troops. And then he said he's going to pull out again.
Yeah, but with the Saudis, has he wavered on the Saudis? I think he sees the Saudis as real pals.
Allies, big allies the Americans have, and against Iran. So pointing the fingers at Iran is a huge threat. And also the Russian bear and China. He has a lot of enemies, North Korea. So they're not, it's no longer a multilateral, liberal, internationalist world, but that's what Canada should strive for. We should be at the forefront of leading to forge new multilateral contexts and treaties.
Go back to NATO and the TPNW just before we leave, because you seem to say that there's no legal way for Canada to refuse to sign the TPNW because we're in NATO. Is that your own opinion? Because I've heard people argue that. I've heard the contrary. I think it's Peggy Mason who claims that Canada could sign the TPNW, but not ratify it. Now, I don't know. I don't understand.
There's a bunch of arguments that are being made. I'm not familiar with the former ambassador for disarmament, Peggy Mason's precise argument. I know, like, for example, Alan Ware and others are arguing that we could sign it and then wait and say we're on the road to ratifying it. We're going to try to abide by it. So they're saying that they would not water it down, but just say that you can sign it in principle, that you plan to move that way. The problem with that is it's just like this Article 6, General Complete Disarmament, which is that, okay, we're going to move in time, but you never specify when. When are you going to move toward disarmament? And so if you water it down in that way, then it moves beyond its original intent. And in many ways, it's, I think what they should do is they should sanction the countries that are not signing it. And they should say, we will no longer buy French wine. We will no longer buy British products, and start a worldwide sanctioning movement of food and wine and goods, because that will hurt their pocketbooks. And we have a global movement now that's united not just by climate change, but because my daughter is out there every Friday in a march, Friday afternoon, missing school, because she's concerned about climate change. And
she's in that school strike.
She's organizing it. She's
really? I wish I had known that. We have a story coming out in the next issue of the magazine about Victoria's peace strike. So,
yeah, she's totally involved. She's super involved in that. She organized a rally, 600 students. They blocked the city hall. She was up there leading the chants. She's only my daughter. And that's the next generation. So they're looking for options. And I think sanctions of the nuclear weapon states and put the pressure on them. It's too late for the 2020 for change. I think we're going to have to work toward 2025, unfortunately, and 2030. I have no hope that they will come to any agreement with President Trump and Vladimir Putin at the helm before next year. So I hate to leave on a negative note, but there are other things that we can do. And, one thing is to get a subscription to Peace Magazine. I was just, I was in Vancouver and I saw some friends of mine from 30 years ago. We knew each other in disarmament. They said they've had a subscription for as long as you've been around.
Bless
and that's how they learn about what's happening all across Canada. And I just showed your magazine actually I went to the Abolition 2000 meeting, which was all the organizations there. And they were wondering how they could network and figure out. And I literally stood in the middle and said, this is how we do it in Canada.
Give us their email address and I'll work on it. It's really, that's really what we need.
Made a great contribution to peace by founding and continuing with that incredible publication. And you've contributed to it. And some of your articles are extraordinary. You'll hear from me again, I hope. And I like to see the globe in the background there of the world that you have. With my students, we play on the last day a game, which is like Jeopardy. It's called Global Jeopardy. And I have 8 globes, and there's 100 of them. So they run up and down to go to the globe, and then they get to ask a question on the Jeopardy, and it's a lot of fun. We do my globe must be about 45 years old. You can see how many countries have no longer existed since then. The map would be quite different now. We've used up our time, dear. In fact, a little more than, but it's been such fun, and we certainly have jumped all over the map. It wasn't a consistent trajectory, but it's really been fun. Okay, well, it's great to see you, and lots of love. Take care. Yeah, and we didn't even get to look out your window at the bears. I understand. Oh, well, I'll give you one last shot there. All right. That's where the bears are. They're not the Russian bear, but the big black bears here. Yeah, they come up to the window. Yesterday, and one of them at lunchtime. So I was like, should I go outside? But anyway, there's deer, and there's ravens, and there's paragliders, and all. Okay, very good. Well, give my good wishes to Gypsum, British Columbia, and your bears. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Bye. Bye.
This conversation is one of the weekly series Talk About Saving the World, produced by Peace Magazine and Project Save the World. Please visit our website at tosavetheworld.ca, where you can sign the Platform for Survival, a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if enacted, would greatly reduce the risk of 6 global threats to humankind. Come back next week for another discussion of a serious global issue.